Fossil fuel companies are often portrayed as climate villains, stalling meaningful global action on climate change. Only a handful of energy companies are responsible for two-thirds of all climate pollution. Many of these corporations, often coordinating with other similar companies and industry associations, have been caught misleading the public, media, and policymakers about climate change. More visible since 2023, several companies are withdrawing from their net zero emissions commitment, derailing the global clean energy transition. Yet, businesses self portray themselves as victims of climate impacts who deserve society's sympathy. Companies face significant financial and existential risks due to climate change. The uncertainty in projecting climate impacts and its trickle down effects on the economy and society make businesses as vulnerable to climate impacts as any other social institution. Companies must also respond rapidly to changing consumer preferences and regulations. In addition, businesses present themselves as white knights, saviors, local heroes, and problem solvers, boldly protecting the world from the impacts of climate change. Their actions may not appear commensurate, but corporations position themselves as competent climate actors, helping the world make sensible choices. However, such self portraits seldom match actions, resulting in even more greenwashing and public distrust. Victims, villains, and white knights are three archetypes one can use to explore corporate communication about climate change. Corporations are among the world's biggest polluters. Just 78 corporate and state owned agencies are historically responsible for over 70% of global carbon dioxide emissions, according to a report from Carbon Majors. From 2016 through 2022, just 57 corporate and state producing entities are attributed to account for 80% of global emissions. While Chevron, ExxonMobil, and BP are the three largest contributors, accounting for 31% of all emissions, state-owned entities such as Saudi Aramco, Gazprom, and the National Iranian Oil Company account for 33% of emissions. Most of these carbon majors are headquartered in the US, while 5 are in China. The rise in emissions is most pronounced among companies in Asia, where 13 out of 15 businesses tracked in the carbon majors database have increased their emissions. Richard Heath pioneered research to evaluate the role of major fossil fuel companies in contributing to the climate change problem, first focusing on emissions attributable to ExxonMobil. In the first peer-reviewed article published in 2014, Richard Heath estimated that 90 fossil fuel companies contributed to 63% of all fossil fuel emissions since 1751. This study received a lot of media coverage, including from The Onion, which blamed 7 billion people instead of the fossil fuel companies for climate change. Recent studies pinpoint the role of carbon majors or industries primarily in fossil fuel and cement production in contributing to climate change. For example, just 90 major industrial carbon producers were found responsible for 57% of the observed rise in atmospheric CO2 and about 42 to 50% of the increase in global mean surface temperature and about 30% of global sea level rise. In another study, just 122 carbon majors were responsible for 0.48 degrees Celsius increase in temperature in 2010. In 2022, such carbon majors were estimated to contribute 0.68 degrees Celsius to global warming. Moreover, these companies are contributing to the historical heat waves the world has been experiencing in the past few years. Lickner and colleagues estimated CO2 emissions from 88 companies involved in the fossil fuel industry and cement manufacturing as responsible for more than half of the global surface ocean acidification. Increasing ocean acidification threatens several thousands of jobs in fisheries, coastal aquaculture. Nationally, the top 5 emitters, such as the US, China, Russia, Brazil, and India, have been estimated to have caused about $6 trillion in income losses from warming since 1990, or about 11% of annual GDP. Scientists have estimated that the partial damages from emissions of 25 oil and gas carbon majors are about 20 trillion US dollars between 1985 and 2018. The partial damages referred to the 33% split between producers, emitters, and policymakers. They estimate that top 25 carbon majors were responsible for 14 to 115 trillion US dollars damages when accounting for total damages. These include Aramco from Saudi Arabia, which is responsible for partial damage of 2.8 trillion, ExxonMobil 1.3 trillion, and Shell 1.1 trillion US dollars, among others. However, these carbon majors made $30 trillion in profits during this time, about 50% larger than their estimated partial damages. Scholars have proposed morally based reparations for the top 21 carbon majors and found that these big companies need to disburse 5,444 billion between 2025 and 2050. Saudi Aramco, ExxonMobil, and Shell are the top three companies with the highest reparations. Such research that helps account for responsibility and damages may lead to more proactive action by these industry leaders. Corporations are not immune to climate change negative impacts. On the one hand, businesses increasingly face supply chain disruptions, increased operational costs, and physical damage to their assets. On the other hand, they face increasingly regulatory and legal risks, increasing consumer and investor pressure to act on climate change.